Hello, I'm Tom Harper.
And I'm Georgina Brown.
Welcome to That Wilbur Smith Show,
A podcast about the life and legacy of the legendary adventure writer Wilbur Smith.
I am strong enough now, Centaine spoke aloud, and I have learnt how to keep alive. I don't have to follow them anymore. I could turn back to the south again, alone. She stood uncertainly, imagining what it would be like, and it was that single word that decided her. Alone, she repeated. If only Anna were still alive. If only there was somewhere out there for me to go, then I might attempt it. And she slumped down on the beach and hugged her knees despondently. There is no way back. I just have to go on, living each day like an animal, living like a savage, living with savages. And she looked down at the rags which barely covered her body. I just have to go on, and I don't even know where. And her despair threatened to overwhelm her completely. She had to fight it off as though it were a living adversary. I won't give in, she muttered. I just won't give in, and when this is over, I will never want again. I'll never thirst and starve nor wear rags and stinking skins again. She looked down at her hands. The nails were ragged and black with dirt and broken off down to the quick. She made a fist to cover them. Never again. My son and I will never want again, I swear it.
That was from Wilbur's 1985 novel The Burning Shore, which is notable for being the first novel in Wilbur's Courtney series that really foregrounded a female protagonist. In his autobiography on Leopard Rock, Wilbur describes the novel as a turning point in my writing life, the first time I expanded my range and tested my ability by seeing the world through the eyes of a female main character. And it's that character, Centaine Courtney, one of Wilbur's most indelible heroines, who we'll be looking at today.
And there are multiple ways to enjoy a Wilbur Smith book, and one of those is as a listener. But behind every audio book recorded, there is, of course, an artist. Few people have to get inside a character's head as much as the artists who give a voice to these people who only exist on a page. So we're joined today by Melanie Crawley, voice artist and actor for stage, TV, radio, and podcasts. Melanie is someone who is used to stepping into other people's shoes and is going to help us take a deep dive into the world of Centaine Courtney and what it means to be a heroine in a man's world. Melanie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Melanie, we know that you had never read a Wilbur Smith book before this, and what an absolute pleasure to have all of Wilbur's books ahead of you. I guess it's quite common, though, in your line of work to come to an author fresh. What were your first impressions?
Yeah, he's a great writer. The story just romps along, and he is a craftsman of language and uses a really great wide vocabulary without shutting down to you as a reader. It doesn't make it too inaccessible or anything like that, I think. It's a pleasure to read. He's just really good at structuring the whole thing. He describes his characters very vividly, and that really helps because when you're narrating fiction, you do need to be able to evoke the individuality of each character, and you don't necessarily have to do that by making them have a very kind of almost pantomime-esque character voice. As long as you understand the character, then you can, for the listener, you can fairly easily kind of differentiate them, even if you've got a whole page's worth of just dialogue with when they haven't been told who's speaking, for example. So I would say that, yeah, if I was preparing this as a narrator, I'd be very pleased because it's a gift really for somebody like me to be able to do it. And there's also so many different types of writing in it. There's action, there's lots of emotion, there's poetry, lots of imagery, and of course the challenge of those interesting languages and accents that you might try and kind of, might help you bring it to life as well.
Yeah, and in fact, I think what you've said there captures pretty much all of Wilbur's books, that diversity and breadth of writing, the style, the fact that there is just so much crammed in there, all in the service of this extraordinary epic story. You mentioned about sort of getting in the characters' heads and being able to sort of understand them. Do you have a sort of a process or ways in which you approach that in terms of trying to work out sort of the soul of a character? What are the sort of things that you look for?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think the most important thing is what you've got, the information that you've got is written on the page. So, to some extent, you can try and imagine the kind of backstory for people or what kind of person, what they might look like and things like that. And I know that there are narrators that do that, but I try and limit myself to what's written on the page. So that's your information, kind of that's your treasure chest of stuff that you can kind of draw on. So to that end, you need to know the text well enough to be able to kind of find that information and build your character. I think also when you're trying to think about a character and how to convey them to the listener, the next most, or the probably equally important, is their relationship to other people and or the places that they are or whatever it is that they interact with. Because what you're trying to find is their intention and I suppose their function within the narrative. So yeah, I suppose it's about kind of trying to understand the character within the context of the overall narrative, really, and differentiating them from the others and finding their intention and what they're about within the story.
I was really interested by what you said there about knowing what the character's trying to do, because I've heard that as a piece of advice from a writing side of things. As the writer, it's much easier and the story's better if you always know in any scene what your character's trying to do. But I'd never thought of it from the actor's point of view, that actually it makes it so much easier to, as you say, to act if there is action. So yeah, that's fascinating.
Mm.
And another comparison to draw there between acting for stage or screen and narrating an audiobook. Of course, there's still dialogue and you still have to really get the voice of those characters. But how much direction do you have? Is there someone telling you, yes, that's Centaine?
Sometimes, yes, you go into a studio and you might have a director who will help you. And actually, if I'm directed, it's usually what they call down the line, which is very much like this is, where you've got the director on the line. But really, they act more as a producer. You don't get too much in the way of direction, at least I haven't with the books that I've done myself.
It's interesting because Centaine, who we're going to talk about in a lot more detail, she, as Tom mentioned, was Wilbur's first female protagonist. So that does bring another element, a different element to the voice and to the story. What did you make of Centaine?
I thought she was a great character. It's really interesting because what happens in the book, of course, it's in sections. And the first section is very much about being in the midst of the First World War in France. And it's a kind of a classic romance. I'm not that interested in reading about dogfights and people and men being heroes in war. And Centaine, I think, took her place there in that context. And I wasn't that interested in her. But then, I don't know, as their romance between her and Michael, the person that Wilbur Smith initially sets up to be this hero character, she starts to get stronger. And she is the one who is kind of leading him, really. She comes across as being more experienced in kind of, well, in the matters of the heart or in the matters of going to bed together as well. So she leads him, actually, which is quite surprising and unexpected. And then from then on, I think it's almost like I felt like he was kind of revealing this part of himself, this really important core part of himself, which was he is a child of Africa, and his deep love for Africa and his knowledge of Africa. And it's almost like he kind of, I don't want to sound too crass, but, after they'd made love, it's almost like he kind of imbued her with his great love of Africa. And from then on, I felt that was what came out of her. So she almost like absorbed this dream of Africa and this great, beautiful, wonderful country. And her kind of, her drive and her determination from then on kind of built in really interesting ways. And so, yeah, I mean, I liked her. She was very young, I suppose, when we first met her, and a bit kind of naive. But of course, that's how you build an interesting character. All these things happen to her that she has to overcome. That's great storytelling. And so, but really, I think it wasn't until she got to her the most terrible of situations, when she arrived on the coast of Africa. And then I think you saw this blossoming of this character. And I from then on, I found her absolutely fascinating. I was really, really interested in her. And in everything that she did, all her attitudes and how she responded to things. For me, it was almost like it was kind of like the novel restarted. It was like it kind of not stalled, because it didn't, but it's almost like there were two beginnings, and for me that was the second beginning, and that's the one that I felt really revealed who Centaine. She revealed who she was, and so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's from a writing point of view, it's the structure of the book is fascinating. It's very unusual in that, again, for listeners who maybe haven't read it so recently, it starts in the middle of World War I, on the eve of the Somme offensive in 1916, and Michael Courtney is this fighter pilot ace. And it's very much his book in the first chapter. And Centaine is just a woman who rides out under the flight path as they're taking off every morning, and he waves to her and she waves back, and he thinks it's good luck omen. And yeah, the first, I don't know, 50 or 100 pages is all, as you say, dogfights and the camaraderie of the fighter pilots. And air combat and that. And then he sort of meets her and gets together with her, but it's still very much his story, pretty much up to the moment that, well, without giving too many spoilers away, it stops being his story. And it's such a bold move to set up the reader to think that this is his story, and then suddenly he is out of the story in a very big way. It's almost sort of reminiscent of Psycho, the way that you think that Janet Leigh is the big name heroine in it, and then sort of Hitchcock pulls the sort of the shock switcheroo a third of the way through the movie. Yes, and then you're right, it almost starts again as Centaine's story. So yeah, it's the way he does it is really bold.
I would agree, absolutely, yeah, and then to kind of allow her to have this time where she is communing with, it's not about a romance, it's about kind of just meeting people that she has never met before and has no any understanding of their culture necessarily, except what perhaps Michael has told her. She has some recognition, doesn't she? But to allow it within quite a big book, that's quite a large chunk of the book is taken with kind of explaining how she comes to terms with her situation and the decisions that she makes, how in terms of how to keep herself alive, which mean that she has to turn round and go in a different direction to the one that she was going to go on. So yeah, you kind of see her growing up, always mindful of the fact that she has this. Are we going to have to do spoilers, right? So sorry, but she's carrying Michael's baby, and she's taking the baby to the place of safety, she hopes. So that's the kind of driving force. But yeah, it's almost indulgent. It felt quite indulgent to kind of read about this woman and be allowed to spend time with her where she's not just kind of an instrument of a romantic narrative story. She's not just there to interrupt the hero. She's already kind of interrupted the hero, but she's now on her own journey, and it was kind of a privilege to be with her and kind of in that journey, and to have her point of view as well, a woman's point of view who was with child, and to be introduced to all of these different images and kind of themes around about the idea of kind of the source of life and kind of the spiritualism of this great place, which is described so beautifully and so vividly, and to put her in such a place which is so harsh. That's when you see who a character is, because you do all these things to her and she's got to deal with them, and that's how a good writer will show you who a character is.
I think in this novel, Wilbur Smith has very, very cleverly taken her from these two extremes. So the warfare of the First World War, the trench warfare, the Battle of the Somme, the sheer brutality and busyness that is around her, and all of the horrors that she sees, and how her character develops with that. But then once she does reach Africa, that sheer desolation, the loneliness and emptiness. So he's created these two very, very difficult situations and is showing us her strength of character at being able, I think, to be able to deal with both of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because there's the German counterattack and the British have to retreat, and Centaine goes with them. And the description of that, you're right, it's just busy. It's just all going on. It's chaos. There's noise. There's thousands of people, wounded soldiers screaming, shells coming in. Everything's going off, and you're right. And then the contrast with this absolute Spartan, bare landscape where she finds herself in the Skeleton Coast in Namibia. It's really striking contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many characters brought into it as well. I mean, how many, even on the boat, she gets proposed to about 20 times, doesn't she?
Yeah, yes.
And then suddenly she's left with two people, the San, Owa, and Hani. And I thought was really nice as well about the description about what their relationship is like. Because he describes their relationship as this long-standing marriage, as a real partnership, and that each person has their role. And it's just such a contrast to what we've seen with Centaine. She has this great romance with Michael, and then, all of these potential suitors coming her way. But then there's this completely opposite relationship. But yes, I agree. I think that, just the lack of people, and it's just three humans and lots, animals and flora and fauna and mountains and dunes, and this place takes on its own character as well, doesn't it? They talk about the singing sands, and each different element of this amazing terrain and place has different characteristics that sometimes are like human characteristics themselves. So I suppose all of those people, those soldiers, and they've been replaced really with kind of rocks and stones and plants and trees and zebras and lions and what have you.
And we spend a lot of time there. She's learning a new way of life.
Yeah.
She's learning a new language. She's learning
Yeah.
respect for Hani and Owa and
Yeah.
their traditions, their way of life.
Mm.
And she's managing her pregnancy.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say she's determined, she is feisty, she is strong,
Yeah.
a complex character, all of those things that you would expect from someone when you title them an adventure hero.
Yeah.
Would you call her a heroine? And in fact, before we answer that, maybe what do you think it takes to be a heroine?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that's quite philosophical. You can be a heroine or a hero if you overcome difficulty, no matter how small. If it's big enough for you, then it makes you a hero or a heroine, I suppose. But if you're talking about the kind of classic idea of a hero or heroine, I think she stands up to that as well, for that, under the scrutiny of that idea too. Yeah, definitely. I mean, she's pitted against this utterly harsh and unforgiving place. Not only that, if she were a man and she were doing that, but she's a woman and she's pregnant. Doesn't always feel great when you're pregnant. And he talks about that, that she's very tired and, I mean, she nearly starves to death. So yes, absolutely. Of course she is. More than a heroine, I would say. Yeah, it's interesting above and beyond that, absolutely. He really does set it up right high, and she meets every challenge
Yes,
in the end.
In fact, sometimes you have to keep sort of reminding yourself that, I mean, you say she's a woman. She's barely a woman. She's sort of 17, maybe 18 or
17.
19 by the time the book
Yeah,
finishes.
yeah,
And as you say, and pregnant through a lot of
yeah.
it. But you also mentioned the things she has to do to survive, and the choices she makes. And she makes some pretty brutal choices in this book.
Yeah.
And Wilbur sort of puts her in these horrible situations and then doesn't, as is always the way in a Wilbur Smith book, does not shy away or offer an easy way out. Were there moments where she lost your sympathy?
Yeah, well, I mean, to hear her talking of the San people as savages, and although she goes back on that, and as you were saying, Georgina, she gains respect for these people, and ultimately comes to love them. But I think also she talks when she met Lothar about I've not been with a white civilized man for so long, which kind of makes me go, oh, come on, man. But actually, I suppose the thing that I found hardest was the very end of the book with what she does when she essentially pillages this land that she has come to love so much. And I think that's interesting. You can see it as a result of trauma, perhaps, given what her lover did to her protectors, Owa and Hani, maybe. And I mean, Wilbur Smith puts in this idea that she wants to provide good water for her sons and that she's got to do it. But she doesn't really need to do it, does she? Because she's got the protection of the Courtney family. So she doesn't have to do that. She doesn't have to kind of wreck this beautiful place and kill these wild beasts in order to do that. So yeah, I'm not sure really about that. I couldn't quite come to terms with that. I would say that's the only thing I couldn't really forgive her. The other stuff, I get it. It's context. It's the time it's set and the kind of person that she is. And she is obviously, this is in the early part of the 20th century and she's an aristocrat as well. She's part of the elite, we would say now. But so of course she's going to have those kinds of attitudes. That's fair enough, whatever. She's that character. But at the end of the book, I think that is, I don't know whether I didn't understand it well enough, but I found it quite shocking and I just found it a bit sad, really.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me of The Godfather almost, where Michael Corleone, who you're sort of rooting for all the way through, as he goes through, in his case, trying to avenge his father and protect his family, which of course is what Centaine is doing. But at the end of it, all the accumulation of all those choices is that he's become this very emotionally isolated. He's come to a very sort of dark place, and it's not necessarily the happy ending for him, even though he sort of got what he wants. And sort of Centaine's journey reminds me of that.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I suppose as well as the trauma of her lover having killed her two protectors and what really become her grandparents, her family. I suppose also she has to come to terms with losing the man that she thought would be the love of her life for the next part of her life as well. Yeah, I still found it quite difficult to come to terms with. But yeah, no, I agree with your comparison there, Tom.
I think one of the reasons that she is such an extraordinary character, and she is ruthless, and whether some of the decisions she makes are misguided, she does all the things that in Wilbur Smith novels the Courtney men would be doing, but as a woman.
Right.
Does that change the way that we judge her?
Yeah.
Because she shows a lot of compassion, especially at the first half, the first 2/3 of the novel, really.
But yes, I mean, you're right to put that forward and say, do we judge women, in a different way? I mean, I would think I would judge a man in the same way. I would say, well, there was no need for it, really. You don't need to do that. You don't need to kind of pillage that land and wreck that place of beauty. Get a grip of yourself, grow up, stop it, go and find a different way to do it. But I'm being a bit mean. It's kind of a story, and it's a great ending, and the symbolism is really interesting there. And I've been looking at some of the just kind of reading a little bit about the San and their what they thought in terms of kind of like the worshipping of the moon as a god and things like that, and the kind of images that they used in their folklore and their traditions and the mythology and their creation myth and things like that, and of course the bees were part of the San creation myth. And so I suppose the destruction of that is really her just saying, I can't cope with what's happened to me. The only way I can find to deal with this is actually a little bit from like the passage that we just read or just listened to, was her saying, I can do this. It doesn't matter what the world throws at me. I will do it. I have to do it on my own. That's just the way it is. There's no point in being, getting upset about it and wishing for what I don't have. At the end of the day, I'm on my own and I have to get on with it. And so maybe it's just like, I don't want that reminder of them. Why should I give these great kind of guardians of this place this respect? It's going to cost me so many more dollars if I find a different way in. I may as well just blast through them because it doesn't matter anymore. It's only me. You can, of course, you can understand that, I suppose. So yeah, and so I think that I think that I would personally apply the same standards to a man as a woman. I don't think it's necessarily that in this particular instance we're kind of being harsher on her because she's a woman. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's really striking how she does a lot of things that a traditional male hero would do. And the one that made me smile was she's been in this sort of mountain fastness for a long time, and she comes out and she runs into this gorgeous blonde who she jumps into bed with. And of course, that would be the sort of thing that a male adventurer might quite easily do. But in this case, the gorgeous blonde is Lothar de la Rey, the local hunter warrior man. And she, in fact, takes up with him, then falls out with him, goes off, and never wants to see him again. So it's quite a sort of stereotypically masculine way of approaching that kind of relationship. But with the crucial difference, of course, that for her, she can't just walk away from the relationship because as a woman, there are kind of longer lasting consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, that's quite right. She does bump into this gorgeous blonde and say, well, yeah, okay, why not? I'm lonely. Yeah.
Did you relate to her in any way? Did you feel like this was
that's
maybe
not
that was
a very gallant question to ask straight off the back of that last question, but
I know, bad timing there, bad timing. But at any point, did you feel like this was a man's idea of a woman?
What?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm really interested in this because obviously, as a man, to me, she seemed really well realized, and even things like describing her labor pains, it seemed so vivid and so visceral. I thought, God, Wilbur must have given birth at some point to be describing this. But
yeah.
then I'm a man, so I'm really curious in both of your points of view on like, did she ring true?
Well, I think she did ring true. I agree. I thought that the description of the birth, both of them actually were really interesting, and I mean, I think that in reality, women are actually quite interesting, and it's only the repeatedly told narratives written by men that kind of show all of us that what a woman should be like. And it's not just narratives, but lots of stuff in in the media, but the stories that we've been told over and over again that have been told by men predominantly, they tell us what the right what the right kind of woman to be should be. They tell us that we should be looking for beauty and maybe compliance and motherliness and or whatever the other kind of qualities of a woman you might think that everyone should be looking for are. But actual fact, in real life, men find all kinds of women attractive. Of course, men find strong women attractive. Contrary women, and difficult people who have just like won't do what you want them to do, and people that can find a way, that are tenacious and can problem solve, and that they might be filthy, they might have horrible nails, and they might not wash often enough, but you still find them attractive. And I think that she demonstrates that. She's very real, and she's very kind of, you can almost smell her. You can feel the heat from her skin, the way he describes her, that she gets burnt by the sun and she's scarred. But all of that, does any of that put you off? I don't think it does it? It just makes you want to meet her and actually look at her, because it sounds like she's a really beautiful human being in every sense, I think.
Absolutely. I'd agree. I think she just feels very, very real. And over the course of the novel, you spend much more time in her company. And at the beginning, she is young and she is naive, but she's also had a very, a difficult upbringing, being kind of brought up through her formative teenage years during the First World War. And you see her grow into this woman that she becomes by the end of the novel. That's because of all of these hardships that she goes through and the way that she deals with them. And by the end, I feel like I understand her, even if there's points where I might not like her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's a quote from Wilbur where he describes her as the female lead kicked the ass of all the males in the book, which is a pretty succinct summation of it. But it also draws attention to the fact that this is a massively male-dominated book. Almost all the characters are male, with two really key exceptions, which again is really interesting, because there's a brief cameo at the end from Ruth and Storm Courtney, from Sean's side of the family, but otherwise there's almost no female characters at all, except for Anna, who is her nurse cum maid cum guardian, who comes with her to Africa from France. And then Honey, who is the San woman who she falls in with. And these are both so key to the story. And there's, again, such strong women who are also completely dominating the men around them.
Yes, I think you're right. They are strong women and they do dominate the men around them. I would suggest the way that they're described is a little bit more what I probably would expect from a male author who's writing adventure stories. Certainly Anna is. I think the relationship with her and Centaine is quite Shakespearean.
Yeah, it's like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, it's like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, etc. There's lots of instances, aren't there? And I mean, Honey is, I don't know, I think she's a bit different. And I suppose when I kind of put her together with Anna and say that about the way that they're described is kind of perhaps a bit more what I expected. It's really only at the very first time we meet her, when he describes her physically. But actually quite quickly, I feel that she is treated equally. He describes her not really any differently to the way he describes Owa. With Anna, I think, and that's another example of how he develops her character in the same way that he does with Centaine. He sets her up to be this kind of battle axe type woman, ugly, heavy, cantankerous. But then fairly quickly he introduces the fact that she has a sex life. She is having an affair with Centaine's father. So that makes you go, oh, she's quite interesting then, actually. And of course, there's the relationship with her and Centaine, which is really a beautiful relationship. But yeah, as we see her when she gets to Africa and how she deals with Gary Courtney, and she's great. And suddenly you're absolutely on her side. And I think she's funny, and she doesn't take any prisoners, and everyone's scared of her. It's great, and I think that it's kind of a bit. He I suppose he sets up this character and then he subverts it, and I think he's obviously able to do that because he's a really great writer. But they could have been, or certainly Anna could have been a stereotype, and I thought she would be when I first met her, but I didn't think she ended up being at all.
Do you think that's partly as well because of the journey that Anna is taken on? She is possibly a stereotype at the beginning, and then needs just a little bit of cajoling, and she starts to want to break those societal expectations because her love for Centaine is first and foremost above everything, and she believes that she is alive, and she believes that she is going to find her, and she takes charge because she knows what needs to be done. Is that good character development?
I think it is because again, it's classic storytelling. You give your character something to overcome, and then they develop as they overcome that. They meet that challenge. I mean, I think just what you were saying there, Georgina, has just made me kind of think about Anna and Centaine, actually, in terms of their place in society. You started off right at the very beginning talking about the kind of journey from her being this kind of naive young woman. She's an aristocrat. She's countess, daughter of a count, and lives in a chateau. And Anna is a servant within that structure. It's a strict hierarchical structure, and those people know their place. They've spent their whole lives learning their place and rehearsing every single day how to fulfill the demands of those roles. But as soon as you take them out of those places and say, well, you have to exist here now, the rules are not the same. That's when you see the real person. And you could say that about anybody. So I suppose it's just a good idea to have done that and then allowed her to become herself. I think that if she'd have remained very strictly within that role that she's always had, then that would have been a bit strange. And I don't think it would have been interesting, particularly. But she met the challenge. So she's a hero as well, I suppose, a heroine as well, isn't she?
I think you could argue that they all are, the three key women in this story.
The three women, yeah.
And in fact, Anna, you could argue, is actually probably in some ways, the most straightforwardly sympathetic, because what drives her is rescuing Centaine. And she'll stop at nothing to do that. And she's never put in a situation where she has to do anything really awful to do that. She just has to persevere over months and months and years in the end, and just won't stop. So she becomes tremendously sympathetic. Having started out, as you said, as this almost sort of seeming like one of these sort of stock characters who's just there for a bit of comic relief and to keep the star-crossed lovers apart. But in fact, I think one of the things about this book is there's probably 5 or 6 books that could tell this same story. So actually, Anna could have a story all of her own because her adventures definitely merit that. Michael's story could easily be a book in its own right. And probably the Sand people, if you think about the lives they've lived and the hardships they've had and the challenges they've had to overcome, again, an epic tale all of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, you could. Yeah, I mean, I know that he's written more about this. I think there are 2 more books, aren't there, after this? And I don't know at what point they begin, how far after the conclusion of this. But yes, I think there's a great well of, material there that you could see that easily being taken forward for more stories. Yeah.
Would you want to sit down and have a glass of wine with Centaine? Do you think you'd enjoy her company?
I would love to listen to her stories. I don't know if I'd want to. I don't know whether I'd want to have to actually tackle her for any reason. Do you know what I mean? Actually have to interact with her in order to get anything done. But yes, if she was going to sit me down with a glass of wine and just tell me about her stories, it's actually one of the first things I thought when I started to read the section where she was going on the trek across Africa. I thought, God, I can just imagine her sitting down when she's a really old woman and telling her adventures to her grandchildren. So yeah, absolutely, I'd love to hear all about it.
I just think she'd eat me for breakfast. I think I'd be no match for Centaine. I'd be terrified of her.
I really enjoy we're talking about her in this way because I think we're thinking of the woman she has become by the end of the novel.
Yeah.
But there are so many times throughout the course of the novel, for instance, when she's on the hospital ship, she's being referred to as Sunshine. She's, really won the hearts of all of these soldiers, the airmen, all of these people who are, looking for a little bit of hope in their lives. But she also wins, again, I'm using the word respect, she wins the respect and attention of a lot of the senior crew on board. Because she has that curiosity and she wants to learn. And they start to pay attention to her opinion on things because they realise that she is smart and she can offer a new perspective. And I just hope that as a character, she will have that throughout the course of, she becomes quite hard because of all of the things that she's been through. She makes some really, really kind of ruthless decisions. But I hope that she'd never lose that curiosity too.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I mean, it's interesting. I think I almost have kind of blocked out who she was before her development into the Centaine she was by the end of the book. And if you'd have said to me, would you like to meet her at that stage in her life? I'm not sure I would really. I appreciate that she was clever and she made some really good decisions and that she managed to turn the men's minds around towards her, gain their respect. But maybe it's my age. I don't know. I think I like people that have had a bit of life experience. I think that makes people far more interesting. And so actually, if the Centaine that I would like to meet is the one that made it through the desert. I think she would be much more interesting. And I don't think I'd probably get on with her very well if I met her on that ship, particularly. Well, I don't know. I mean, I appreciate that she did a really good job, so maybe we'd work well together. But I don't think I'd go to the pub with her.
She is a great survivor, considering everything that she has been through. But it does come at a terrible cost. Do you see The Burning Shore as a novel, as a story of hope, or as tragedy?
I think, sorry, but I think both. There is hope.
Don't apologise.
Yeah, sorry. It's rubbish of me, isn't it, not to come out down on one side or the other? But because there is hope in the fact that you witness the idea of a white woman from a privileged background at a time when it was perfectly fine to say that white people were civilized but black people weren't, and when white people were persecuting the tribes of Africa and treating them like animals. And even that, the way they treated animals was pretty bad as well, of course. But yeah, but you see an example of that white humanity come into close contact with two of the San people who were so persecuted, and yet almost instantly there's common ground, and they find it with each other almost immediately, just through being human beings, really. And I think there's great hope in that, and I think obviously we're taken on that journey and expanded on that idea. The very place of Africa, its contradictions, the harshness and the beauty coexisting. It's the life thing, isn't it? Yin and yang, and you can't have light without shadow, and the other way around. I think that comes through in this book really clearly, and I think there is hope there. But the tragedy is in just the kind of, I suppose, the attitude towards the environment and plundering the land, and also the idea of ownership of land as opposed to stewardship of land. Wilbur Smith talks about the tragedy of the San, in that they refuse to settle, and they refuse to kind of like agree that land should be owned, and that they rejected that. And I think that there is that tragedy, this just absolute brick wall of kind of not even wanting to try and work with any different idea around that. And I suppose so. Yeah. So I think I've probably gone off piste a little bit by trying to waffle around that, but hopefully you can understand what I mean. Do you?
No, I don't think you're off piste at all. I think it was. I think you're articulating very much what I felt when I was reading it, and almost it seemed to me, as I sort of thought back on it at the end, that I don't know if this is how Wilbur meant it, but it almost functions as a sort of fast forward allegory of white encounters with Southern Africa.
Yes.
In that she comes ashore with nothing.
Yeah.
She's absolutely reliant on the San people, who are the very, very first inhabitants of that part of Africa, to survive, and to show her how to survive, and to provide her with food and water, and teach her the ways of the land. And then over the course of her stay there, she becomes more independent, first of all, by learning how to use some of their skills herself. And then when she hooks up with Lothar, and suddenly she has access to guns and wagons, and then cars and dynamite and petrol and everything that you could possibly need. And she starts claiming the land for kind of, and it ends with her very much sort of, as you say, taking ownership of the land in order to get fabulously rich. And in a sense, that's the history of colonialism, from kind of very marginal visitors through to actually displacing and betraying the people who are there, and taking the land for yourself. So no, I thought it was incredibly powerful. In relation to the ending, I have to bring in the fact that we're recording this on the 20th of May, which, as I'm sure our listeners know, is World Bee Day. And this is rather poignant, because the book's climactic scene, which Melanie have already sort of touched upon, is that to get to this diamond-rich crater, I guess it's a volcanic crater that she needs to get to, but the path through it goes through this cave system, which is completely inhabited by a vast, vast ancient bee's nest. And the choice that she makes is to burn it out, and set it on fire and burn out all the bees, in order to be able to get through to the diamonds. And again, as an author, I was reading the book, and I could see there's about 10% of it left. And I was thinking, okay, most of the big conflicts have been resolved. She's escaped from the predicament of being kind of shipwrecked. A certain amount of material comfort. She's reunited with her family. So what? It didn't seem like there was enough space for like the grand epic battle shootout kind of showdown that I was expecting. And it doesn't come. Instead, the showdown, really, the climactic episode of the whole book, is this decision of hers to go after the beehive, the bee colony. And it seems so random, and saying it now on the podcast, it just seems so small ball. But actually, if you read it as an act of violence and betrayal, it's completely heartbreaking.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it is. It's it's a complete tragedy, and it feels so unnecessary. And and I hated her in that moment when she did that, and she said, "Oh my God, what have I done? God forgive me." And I said, "Well, yeah, what have you done? But you shouldn't be forgiven for that."
Yeah.
Actually, it was the wrong thing to do. It was always the wrong thing to do. But then stuff like that, the image of it really makes you think.
Yeah.
And I think that as a device for that, then that's really interesting, because it does. It makes you think. It makes you think about why she did it, and for me as well, the different images, the connection to the San, and the fact that they were the ones that took her there, and they said this is the place where life comes from, It's so important to them, this spiritual place. It's full of images from the San culture. The idea of a pool in a cave with diamonds in it is one of the myths of San culture, isn't it? There is a myth of a giant golden lizard or serpent rather that protects this lake in a cave with diamonds in it. And the bees were the mantis that they refer to as well. He employs a bee to take I can't remember what he does with the bee now, but anyway, the bee implants it. He puts the mantis on a flower, doesn't he? And then puts a seed in the mantis, and he becomes the first San, I think. But there's all of this stuff. It's all there at this particular point in the book, in this place that he talks about, this mountain, where the drawings are that the spirits have drawn. And it's just so redolent of that. And that act, that thing that she does, I think, just makes you think as a reader about all of that stuff. It really makes you think about what you've just read. And so it might not be the big action climax, but it's the big reading climax. It's the big thought climax. It's the thing that makes you reflect on what you've just read. And I think it kind of makes you enjoy it all over again, because you can't help going back and thinking, well, why has she done that? What does that mean exactly? So I think it's a very clever narrative device, and quite brave, actually, to kind of do that. Brave not to do the big shootout at the end, really, because these are the kind of books where, exactly as you say, Tom, where you expect that, don't you, as well?
Yeah, no, I would never have had, first of all, the imagination to do that. And secondly, even if I'd thought of it, the guts to actually see that through. I was going to credit to the editor as well, actually, for letting it through, because I can imagine some of the editors I've worked with coming back and saying, no, this won't do.
No, I feel like we're kind of almost coming to an end. But I think that's the decision there that Centaine makes with the bees is another thing that shows her as our flawed hero. She isn't this infallible person. She's survived a lot, but maybe she sometimes makes the wrong decision. And I think that's important.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we'll let her off.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I think we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Bye. Thank you.
Until next time, it's goodbye from me, Tom Harper.
And it's goodbye from me, Georgina Brown.
That Wilbur Smith Show is produced by Christopher Wynne. Music by Dewey DeLay. Executive producer Niso Smith.